All right, to wrap up the podcast this week, we're going to go ahead and talk some Alex versus A-Rod. The HBO docu-series is out. First episode dropped on Thursday, November 6th. We're going to cover them each episode each week with a different guest. Join me today to cover the premiere, part one. The host of the Sports in the Waiting Room podcast, Christopher Russo, is with us. Chris, welcome. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks, Mike. Lot to talk about from this one.
Yeah, for sure. So to give the insight here, these about hour-long episodes on HBO. The first one, it's easy to split the 3 seconds of A-Rod's career. We're getting the early portion of A-Rod's career today, the Mariner era, the beginning of the Texas era, and his high school stuff. And we got like, I have to say, give me your general thoughts here. I feel like we got more out of A-Rod here. And we know A-Rod likes to talk about himself, so we know that already. But I feel like we got more out of A-Rod than we could have reasonably expected in an episode that's probably covering the less interesting portion of his career.
Yeah, for me, I think it reinforced. I love where they finished because it is unfortunately it is we and Alex actually, and again, Alex instead of A-Rod actually said it best because I do think in many ways he is Alex at this point in his life. It's a complicated background. I love the way they finished because I have always said that look, the biggest mistake of his career was taking steroids. Obviously, that is what puts an asterisk on his career. But truthfully, you look at his 7 years in Seattle, and it puts him on pace not only to be a Hall of Famer, but to maybe actually be the best ever at the position. And by that logic, if he stays in Seattle, maybe the best Mariner ever as well. And I have said for a while that I think that him, besides the steroids, of course, I think leaving Seattle was maybe the worst mistake of his career because it influenced everything. And this honestly reinforced that because, again, I'm going to go psychological here, but I always thought that Lou Piniella was such a good influence on Alex Rodriguez. I don't think I really realized until watching this how big an influence we only see it for a second, but how big an influence Ken Griffey Jr. really was on him. But I think he was so Lou Piniella said it best that he was so taken care of in Seattle, and he wouldn't have gotten into that trouble. And it's unfortunate because Alex Rodriguez is clearly a person who I don't know about now, but certainly during his career, and especially in that portion when you're 25, 26 going to Texas, and you could be, and I think knowing his personality, he was seriously wounded. I did not realize that his father had left when he was 10, and clearly he was such an incredible influence on him that I almost wonder if dad being there at the very end in 2000 had an influence on him leaving, an influence of saying, bleep you, dad, I want to get out of here. When I think Lou Piniella was kind of like a surrogate father to him, honestly. That was the family that he needed in a time where normally you'd be off at college or somewhere else. And Alex Rodriguez did not have the most typical upbringing. So him going and Scott Boras is also probably, I mean, a lot of people would argue he's a bad thing for baseball a lot, but he's maybe one of the worst things, financially great thing, but from a mental emotional standpoint, might actually be one of the worst things to happen to Alex Rodriguez's career.
Yeah, I do think it's definitely interesting stuff here with the A-Rod doc here. And like, I just feel like they do lean a bit into like, especially at the top when they like it's almost like the Deion Sanders sort of thing where it's like Deion has said, not like, I was like, okay, there's Deion and then there's Prime. Those are two different personalities here. Like, they do lean to the Alex and the A-Rod right at the top. They give you that. They ask him the loaded question about like, what do you think about you getting suspended for the steroids? And like, he gives the Alex answer and the A-Rod answer. So like, I think that's interesting that they sort of like set that up. I wanted to keep going back to that during the series.
Yeah, you know what I found interesting? I don't think I ever realized that Dave Niehaus was the one who gave him the nickname, and Dave Niehaus is widely respected. Now, look, the name A Rod is much more than the name. It's the personality. It is in many ways we obviously affiliated with Alex as the more humble, down to earth version of him, and the A Rod is the maybe for one thing the less clean, but also the more by some people's standards pompous Alex version of him. And Dave Niehaus is someone who is universally beloved in Seattle, one of the underappreciated broadcasters ever. I think was eventually inducted into the Hall of Fame after his passing. But it is so interesting to see. He got that name in Seattle, and for so long he is a different person in Seattle. But there are hints of that, and I think you found that. I think you definitely found that in talking to Cynthia, talking to his ex-wife. I was a bit in some ways surprised. Well, I was surprised that a lot of people were actually on this doc. That Lou, for one thing, was that Junior was, but to see her on there was a serious surprise, I thought.
Yeah, some of the people they got in the documentary. Obviously, they got him, they got his brother, which is not shocking at all here. Pinella I could get because like Pinella doesn't feel like he has any beef with A-Rod. Griffey, I didn't know the relationship, so I'm intrigued by that one. The big get, it feels like, of the episode was the fact that they got his ex-wife to do it, which I was surprised. If I remember correctly at the time, like their relation did not end well. It was a very public and messy divorce. So like either they clearly are on good enough terms. She agreed to participate in this.
Yeah, well, you also think the time has passed. It has been a serious amount of time. It's been 17 years now, and I think she had maybe the most interesting quote of the episode, and it was really disheartening to me. And when she said about her first impressions of him that she felt sorry for him, and that's not something you would expect. It's not an insight that you would expect as someone, especially if someone at that age. Now she might have had sort of a revisionist history, and maybe things cloud over the course of time. But to have that insight very quickly is a very bizarre thing. It is not something you'd expect of someone at that age, but it was also very accurate, knowing the history they would have eventually. And he was, in many ways, on the inside, he just seems like he's a kid. He's self conscious, and it's difficult for. I think he made a good point where he said, I forget the line exactly. I think he said something to the extent of, these people were figuring out who I was at the same time I was, which is a universal quote, but it's definitely true of a public figure, and especially someone like him.
Yeah, I do think like she added in some good context there. Like she felt like that obviously like he obviously follows a very unusual career path, basically being drafted at 18. He's in the major leagues before he turns 19 years old, which is not usual for baseball players. And like he tells a straight story of how he goes to Fenway and they win the game. Like his teammates are going out to drink. He can't go. He's busy sitting in a hotel room because they can't. He cannot all to go into the bar yet. So like it's a very emotionally stunted development where like he's at his age. Most people are like 19. They're on campus. They're going to parties. Like he's just basically like living professional baseball life. And that's very unusual for somebody that young.
Yeah, and even it doesn't have to be that. That's the thing that separates you, though, is baseball. You have such a when you're on the road, you have such a controlled life. Even if you're even if you're a student and you're not going drinking, you can still be able to roam freely and be more open. In a way, at least when he was on the road, and even probably during the baseball season, he was probably more shuttered and sheltered and closed off by the team, by just the general culture of having that job, than you would be in college. And the truth is, I don't know if he might have gone to college if not for one thing, for how talented he was and the offer he was getting, but also the I would say the fact that his family was struggling quite a bit, and at that age, it might be a different story if this was now, where you go in with NIL and kids have that opportunity more. But it was a probably a very difficult decision for him in many ways, and if he even realized it, to go to the Mariners and to forego going to the University of Miami.
Yeah. I think the most notable thing I want to talk about from this episode is the whole saga with his father. We learned that his father left home at 10. Like I don't think we knew publicly before is that like his now ex-wife Cynthia tried to facilitate a reconciliation between them in Minnesota that apparently nobody on the Mariners knew about. And there was this whole saga where they stayed in a separate hotel from the team. They had this adjoining suite where they could come together, and then he puts on a show in this series against the Twins. And those are the only games like his father ever watched him play. And basically, A-Rod said F him after the series. And like, I think that's an interesting sort of point of development here where like you see Cynthia's hopeful, like, okay, maybe this can be reconciled. And when she sees his dad, he's like, he's just like him. Like, I don't know why this fell apart. And it's like sort of seeing like how this clouded his career, basically.
Yeah, it's a bizarre thing because not only that, I didn't realize there was also when you hear, I think it was Dave Niehaus, you hear in the previous footage, and you hear him say Father's Day. And I thought, wow, Father's Day weekend, you actually have him come in. And for him to say that that was, I don't know if it was hyperbole, but for him to say it was the best, probably the best weekend or the best series he's ever played is an unbelievable. And the Twins were a good team at the time too, I believe. So it's a shocking turn of events. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it is right before he leaves to go to Texas. I don't even know if the Mariners winning the World Series or getting past the Yankees or getting the World Series it makes a difference because I think he was so driven at that point, and I think there was just an affiliation of saying no to that authority that hurt him. And it didn't really seem, it seemed like there's a lack of confrontation between the two of them. And the truth is, Alex probably needed to have that confrontation where it seemed, as opposed to him just being quiet seemingly for the first couple of days and probably for that weekend. There wasn't really an address of the situation. It was just him bottling it up and putting it into his play, but he never talked about it. And I think that's what may have been a huge contributing factor to in some ways, his downfall.
Yeah. What else did you want to talk about from this episode?
Wow. I mean, you don't realize how disciplined a hitter he became going into 96. I think he they talk about how he became a much smarter situational hitter. What I find interesting is that they never mention anything about his fielding being bad,
Yeah.
and that's a very impressive thing. And there was that conversation in the late 90s of A-Rod versus Nomar versus Jeter as to who's the best shortstop, and it is probably that era's version of the Otani Judge conversation or Williams DiMaggio. And it's funny because if he sticks to that, you could no matter what his and if he sticks to that and plays clean baseball, he's on a pace where he's probably still going to hit like Barry Bonds. He's probably still going to hit 500 home runs. He's probably still going to be one of the great fielding shortstops ever, and he may actually be more lauded than Derek Jeter, at least for regular season success. And it's funny because I would imagine when we get into the Yankee portion, a lot of it is going to be a comparison between Derek Jeter and he. The foregoing college, the high draft pick, the wanting to go play at home eventually, and then there's just so many differences between the two of them.
Yeah, I think that's something they may bring up next week because I do feel like that this is like they did kind of bounce a little bit. We see in the episode, we see the last game of A-Rod's career at the Yankees. We see some stuff on the Yankees of the 70s, how like he and his brother how they watch like Yankee and Met games with their dad, like before the dad left town. So I think that is something that could be watching next week because like remember the big thing controversies of the Yankee trade was like who's going to play shortstop, and Alex volunteered to go to third. I think that's going to be something to discuss in episode 2 because like I think you're definitely going to hear A-Rod's perspective on why he was willing to move off of third when he was getting his prime as defender.
Yeah, the probable reason is, I mean, it probably helped that Jeter had already been named the captain the year before, but even if he wasn't the captain, he'd been there for 9 years. It was his team. He'd won a World Series MVP. He'd won 4 World Series titles, an All-Star Game MVP. He had so many accolades already at that point, where he had just ingrained himself in the organization. As much as Alex Rodriguez had loved the Yankees as a kid, that was not his team. That was never his team. That was Derek Jeter's team, if not Jeter, Pettit. Well, Pettit was gone at the very first couple of years, but Jeter, Rivera, Posada, and Joe Torre, of course, Barney Williams for the very beginning. It was that group. Alex Rodriguez was an interloper in many cases. And again, that also lines up with strange timing of, oh, that's crazy to think his first year there was the year they blew the 3-0 lead with the Red Sox. Can't imagine it was the best clubhouse situation.
Yeah, and this is the first real ring chaser.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely true. And it's funny because when he goes to Texas, Texas is not a good ball club at whatsoever. I mean, they were only, I think, 2 years removed, maybe from. I think they had gone to the ALDS against the Yankees in back-to-back years, maybe 3 out of 4, something like that. They had Juan Gonzalez. They were a good ball club. They just couldn't get over the hump. But he gets there, and they are god awful. The one saving grace you would think would be Buck Showalter, who is like Lou Piniella, I think another person who should be in the Hall of Fame already as a manager. I don't know why he's not greatly underappreciated, but I think it's still the fact that he went into a
Well,
different situation. It's a foreign situation for sure.
well,
Whereas, if he had gone
well,
to the Yankees straight away, yeah, go ahead.
you say Buck wasn't there at the beginning of his tenure, so Buck was the last year he was there because it was
Okay.
the end of Johnny Oates that he retires. Jerry Narron takes over to 01 and 02, and then they go to Buck in 03.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't think he was there. I couldn't have imagined that they were overlapping. I just saw Buck's face in some of the B-roll, and I wasn't entirely sure. But that's a case where maybe if he's there at the start, you might have a different situation because that's a guy who's a baseball lifer, who's been a great influence on everybody he's managed, and has had a great influence on everyone, even though he's never won a World Series. Had a great influence, was the builder for the Yankees, for the Diamondbacks, in many ways for Texas, even though it took a few more years before they started winning pennants. And the same thing in many ways for the Orioles and the Mets, and just never completed the job. But that's a guy who built teams and built up players, not only as players, but as people better than anybody. And if he had gotten there and Buck Showalter was already in place, we might have a very different story.
Yeah, we could here, and I think the other thing to talk about here is obviously the saga with the contract because like he talked about how like they said that the people how he's turned out like Boris basically advising, okay, we gotta get to the market, we have to get to the market, like you get a huge contract here, and he does on that interview I think with like 60 Minutes back. He's like, I turned down 80 million, I turned down 130 million. He gets the 252, and like he sort of realized when he gets to that press conference here about like how like he sort of set himself up for a fiasco because he made this whole big deal about I want to win. And then he takes the most money from a $252 million team. I think he couldn't find the word for it in the clip, but basically he's like didn't realize that he was basically gonna be interrogated for taking the most money as opposed to like celebrated for setting a record salary for sports at the time.
Interrogated is exactly the word that I was thinking when I watched that, and I was not sure if he had actually said that word, and I guess he didn't. But yeah, not only that, he went to
Yeah.
a division rival, and a team that was terrible. Now, let's say, if it was like Kevin Durant going to the Warriors, where it's yeah, he got a good amount of money, but at least he went to a team that was really competitive, that he could possibly finally win. Texas was terrible. Texas was terrible at the time. He really did take the. I did not realize how great an influence it was that it really was close to twice as much money as any other contract in history at that point. And I remember thinking, I remember talking to people last night about the insane amount of money that people make now and that guys could end up making 50, 60, $70 million a year. When I remember and considering the length of time of money and human civilization, the fact that it was only 18 years ago that Alex Rodriguez was blowing everybody's mind by making 30 million when he re-signed with the Yankees, making 30 million a year. And so for him to make that money at that point is insane by any standard. So yeah, he didn't know what he was getting into. He was probably thrown off by the number, but I think he was also very much swayed by Scott Boras. Clearly, we've talked about Scott Boras, and I think people talk about him more so because even though you have people like Drew Rosenhaus or Don Yee in the NFL, for example, who have that kind of success money wise, it's the tactics and the stories that are told that kind of throw those things off. And then when you have that sort of affiliation, that's another thing that just stands in Alex Rodriguez's way. But to make that decision at 25 or 26, he didn't have anyone to really steer him in the right path who would know that situation.
Yeah, I look at the numbers here. Like it's like 10 years, 252 at the time. If you got that contract today, it's $471 million roughly. So that's the 2025 equivalent of the money here. And his salary of 25 million a year is pretty nuts for back then. But like you look at 25 million today for a player, like that's like the average value on Sean Manaea's contract for the Mets.
Oh God, that is that shows. I would say for one, that shows the outrageous amounts of money we spend.
That's inflation.
And yeah, that's inflation. That's a there's a lot of places we can go with that, and I don't think I think I'd anger a lot of people if I did. So uh, that's across just all over the place. But yeah, it's 25. It's funny. Yeah, I was thinking when you said 40 71, I was thinking 47 million. I hate to say might actually be kind of a steal today for to have a player like him.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate truth. And don't get me wrong, players deserve their money, but it's at some point, the difference between $10 million and $15 million is huge. The difference between I don't know 15 and 115 million. It's difficult to describe everything like that. The difference between 30 million and 60 million is big. The difference between 400 million and 600 million is probably not actually that big.
Yeah, I was looking up out of my curiosity in terms of the contracts that in terms of baseball, in terms of like what would top the value of the contract he got. There's only three deals like in the history of the league that would top the inflated value of A-Rod's contract. Because obviously Soto, Ohtani, and Vlad Guerrero's extension with the Blue Jays.
Yeah, and but that also shows on the flip side because those are great ball players. Shohei Ohtani has placed his name among the great baseball players ever. But you know, do you think of any of those guys as having a peak at least so far as I mean, maybe I guess Ohtani, but you think that maybe with inflation, adjusting for inflation, that somebody like Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays would make something like that for their time, but that it shows the evolution of baseball where we've gone way too far one way to way too far to another way. When you go back to guys are making $6,000 where most guys are making 10, and that's part of how the Black Sox scandal started. So it is the bizarre change over the course of the history of Major League Baseball and the history of professional sports.
Yeah, and also I will say the Ohtani thing I tend to throw an asterisk on guys like well deferred money because I think like if it was present day value, like he's not getting paid that much compared to like that the Dodgers basically got to throw 680 million of it in escrow and just wait to pay it out.
Yeah, that's another thing that is being discussed across baseball is that across sports is the deferred money, and it's in some ways just the way that you can spend your money because there is still somewhat of a limit. Is It's being discussed across Los Angeles, considering how the Clippers allegedly got money to Kawhi Leonard. So it's how you spend the money, how you are able to somehow, in some ways, for lack of a better word, funnel that money.
Yeah, and the present day value of Otani's contract, if you go by the luxury tax thing, 460 million, so that even comes in below A-Rod, like the A-Rod inflation contract.
Yeah, it's some teams are signing those deals sooner, and then it's also does that include bonuses?
This is just like the 460s that defer basically the value, the present day value of the contract. Because remember, the money tomorrow is worth less than the money is right now.
Okay. Regardless, everybody is making a ridiculous amount of money compared to the almost the entire rest of the world in almost any other field.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody you're surprised you not hear from this week? Because obviously, like given the circumstances, like A Rod's dad was not going to be involved in this. I would assume, like, are you surprised you didn't hear from Boris directly?
Not really. No, I mean, it's one thing about inflating ego, but I don't think I'm not that surprised not to hear from him. I can't imagine there are the best of feelings in the post retirement world between the two of them. I don't know. That's I mean that's taking a guess. I was going to say maybe not hearing so far from perhaps Edgar Martinez or Randy Johnson or someone like that to start, but yeah, they checked a lot of boxes to get family, to get his brother, to get his ex-wife, to get Ken Griffey Jr. And I did not realize how close a relationship they actually had, which was a very heartwarming thing, I think, for me, even though it's ultimately kind of sad just knowing where he's going. But they crossed a lot of boxes for me. I was not that surprised.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if A-Rod's mom declined was considered for participation. We didn't see her.
I don't know. I don't know much about his family background going past 2000. Actually, I'm not particularly aware, or at least of his immediate family, his the family he was born with. I would say I'm not sure of the current indications with his parents. I know Lou Pinella's struggled a little bit health
Yeah.
wise as of
Yeah.
late.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Lou filled the like surrogate father role, which I think was, and it was his first big league match. That was a good get.
yeah, it was a great, and not to mention it's someone he revered as a kid for sure. He's a great ball player in his own right, and then became he's one of the great figures that baseball's ever had. And it's another reason I don't understand why he's not in the Hall of Fame yet. But not to mention the whole, also from Florida, also spoke Spanish, speaks Spanish. That was a great person to have, especially when you could go no further away to play Major League Baseball than Seattle.
Yeah. And this is something I wonder if we're going to see next week when this episode continues here. It's like, we get any of his teammates from Texas. I wonder if we get any more detail on the time of Texas. We just try to skip over that and go right to the Bronx.
I would. The truth is, there should be a lot about Texas because I want to know when exactly, because I'm pretty sure it was not until he hit Texas that he started taking performance enhancing drugs. I want to know what was the last straw that pushed him. Who was the person that pushed him toward that? And it seems like Texas was the place where that started.
Yeah. So the last thing here is like, obviously next week, like, are you going to keep watching this?
Yeah, I think probably I'm going to be. I mean, there are a lot of things I need to catch up on, honestly, and I've been working a lot, but I will. I'm going to try. I'm going to have it in the back of my head at the very least. Yeah.
Yeah, episodes come out on Thursday nights on HBO. They're on HBO Max the next day. Next week, presumably the start of the Yankee tenure I think I remember correctly, the cutoff is around the World Series in '09, like right before he gets into the steroid issues. So I think that's an interesting spot here. I think the thing I'm watching for next week is like, what Yankee people are we getting in this thing here? Because obviously we remember from Jeter's docuseries, he took a big dump on A-Rod, basically made him the bad guy and everything. So that's one you're watching here. We get Joe Torre, we get other teammates. Like, that's something I'm watching to see who from the Yankees talks.
I'm expecting to see Jeter because obviously, if they can work together on a daily basis or a weekly, whatever, if they can work together on Fox, I would think they're in a good place at this point.
Yeah.
Joe Torre, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised. There are. It's funny because I think he has, in some ways, distanced himself from the Yankee organization, or really the Yankee organization, and I would say the fan base especially has kind of distanced itself from him, knowing some of his background. But you see him come back toward uh, old timers day, and you see some of the appreciation that is ultimately had for him, and knowing that there is greatness aside, there would have been greatness for him anyway, aside from an asterisk, and there is an appreciation for how much of a beating he took in the press for any given thing. I I would not be surprised to see a fair amount of folks within the Yankee organization show up.
Yeah, we'll see what happens here with that, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. If you want to follow you on social media, how can I do that? And keep up what you're doing on the Sports in the Weight Room podcast.
Yeah, so well, for first off, you can find me on let's see, so public stuff, just X or Twitter. I'm a big Craig Ferguson fan. He calls it Twix now. I like that. And I think it would be at Chris Russo 98. Find me on Instagram at Chris Russo 1998. And yeah, the podcast you can find stuff on there about the podcast. You can find stuff on X in particular about the podcast. I actually have not done an episode in a few months now, and that's because I just try to stick to that Wednesday schedule. And I just have not had a free Wednesday, in no small part thanks to you, actually, just because
Yep.
I've had so much work as of late. But yeah, hopefully going to have more stuff soon. Just be able to talk about that.